Holly Cafiero, and I am the CHRO of Druva. I have been in the industry as an HR leader for about 30 years, mostly in high tech, all different sizes, from startups to tens of thousands of employees. I've been at Druva now for a little over 2 years. I'm approaching 2.5 years. When I joined the company, we were around 650 or so, and now we're approaching about 1,000. So the company is had some tremendous growth, been very successful. The top-down process is the strategic plan for the next year. So how are we growing? How are we winning? What's the product roadmap? That very, very high level plan for the company. What's the revenue plan? What's the profitability plan? And out of that comes how much investment is needed, which is usually the form of people. That's the top-down plan. So the very, very high level plan, that's where you're going to get your headcount plan at the highest level, like X number of people, 300 people, whatever it is. So that's the top down. And then from the bottoms up is, how do I figure out where those 300 people are going to be existing? What teams, what skill sets, what geographies, etc. And so somewhere in the middle of the top down and the bottoms up have to meet. So the bottoms up build is where all the actual work happens. So you get your plan of 300 new positions or new people that you need to add to the company. And now the work begins, because now HR is meeting with all the managers in the business to find out, okay, where are these roles going to go? What are the skill sets? How are the organizations going to change? So all the org planning, org design, how are the roles going to change other people's roles? Sometimes as companies grow, especially in a startup, the roles have to split apart, where you might have somebody with 2 or 3 roles, and now you have the resources to go deeper. And so the roles are going to split apart and you can hire specialists. And so this is where there's tremendous change in an organization. So you have to plan for that change. And a lot of times this process is iterative too. You have to kind of look at this and peel it back and go back and forth a few times till you kind of get a refined view of your organization and how you're going to allocate the headcount, across the globe, whatever your organization might be. So the process of kind of getting your headcount numbers and getting to a refined actual plan that you can implement is iterative. So for example, working with our engineering team, that's the group that's been growing the fastest, that and go-to-market. But in this case, in our engineering team, we start off with the list in a spreadsheet, and we continue to refine it and go back and forth. We pull market data to look at all the potential jobs. We look at our roadmap, and we tweak and we move back and forth and figure out which managers do we put these positions under. Now, how many more managers? What's our span of control? How does that change? We look sometimes at, the compensation, because the market's moving so quickly. How does that impact the people who are there? So again, the spreadsheets go back and forth, probably dozens of times, dozens of iterations, and even different org charts we look at. We test org charts, and this is also sometimes in Google Sheets, which is tricky because you can go back and look at different versions. So when you're sharing and you accidentally share with somebody you didn't want to share with, that can be tricky too. So, but it's probably dozens of spreadsheets, so that by the end of it, you get to something that you've thought through all the pieces of how, the org, the compensation, the span of control, and ultimately the headcount plan. The challenge, I would say, that I've seen across my 30 years doing this is that HR gets involved early enough. And that there's time for the planning in advance. A lot of times the HR team will get the headcount plan maybe just before the start of the fiscal year, and then all of the stuff that I'm talking about gets scrambled or condensed into just a couple of weeks or even a week or 2. And then you're meant to start filling positions, and they're due to be hired very early on. So, if you know strategic planning is happening, insert yourself as an HR professional as early on as possible. I'm starting to do my own thinking, my own planning for my own team along the way. So I'm not surprised when the headcount plan is locked in. This way, I've kind of got a sense of how I'm already going to line up my own resources. So again, even though it's not finalized, if I've been involved, in the old world, when HR is not involved, then yes, then suddenly you're having to scramble and prioritize and get contractors in order to meet the needs. But if you've been involved, then you should be ready. So now that we're in the post-COVID world, and this headcount planning and the negotiation is so dynamic, all of this is happening through email, through spreadsheets going back and forth, or Google Sheets. It's on Zoom calls, my cell phone, my texts coming in, Slack messages. We're not in person anymore. You can't just walk over. So all of this is happening through several different means, trying to come together, trying to get everybody together to have a plan that's cohesive, that ultimately goes into Greenhouse with the right job description, the right title, the right compensation, is all approved by finance, by the hiring manager, by me. So as you can imagine, with all this communication happening between Slacks and text and emails and spreadsheets and Google Sheets, between finance, HR business partners, recruiters, hiring managers, there's miscommunication all the time. And people are trying to do the right thing, but it just happens, and it happens frequently. So it means there's waste of time, sometimes unfortunately waste of money. And so what we have to do is kind of backtrack and get realigned. And it can be a difference between a role changing from, say, a director to a manager, and we've lost weeks. And now there's frustration, again, because none of these systems talk to each other. It's wildly inefficient. Even though we have a system like Greenhouse, everything around it is outside of Greenhouse, and there's no real system of record. Everything is just outside of it orbiting. So the best practice, in my opinion, for working with finance is start working early with them. They start working early as well, and they start building their models, and people start to fall in love with the models and the numbers. So I try to partner early with them. And then during the year, we work closely with finance to ensure that we stay in sync on the budget. So finance doesn't decide actually what the roles are and who goes in them, or how much we pay. I help them by providing the right compensation data, what those jobs should be. And then it's up to them to sort of make sure we capture it, and then up to us, HR and the hiring manager, to make sure we stick to that plan. So the headcount plan is owned by HR. We determine who should be going into that headcount plan. Finance owns the budget. I think it's been tricky over the past because a lot of times, historically, it's originated in finance. And if HR doesn't have a voice in those plans, it will seem like it's owned by finance. But the headcount plan is owned by HR, and finance approves the budget around that and how we allocate it. But HR chooses what goes into it. Yeah, if HR is not involved in the headcount plan, it can be messy, because then there may not be a lot of good forethought that goes into the structure of the orgs, which roles and when and who, and the market data. I'm suffering a little bit of that right now, where good market data wasn't used, so we're struggling to fill positions because it's out of date and the budget is too low. And hiring managers are frustrated. I'm sure I'm not the only head of HR experiencing that, because the market has moved so quickly. So it's really important that HR and finance are at least partners, elbow to elbow from the very beginning of this process, so they can work together in this. So the recruiting organization is set up almost like the math you need to set up a factory. So if you think about how many recruiters am I going to need, how many sources am I going to need, it's by the headcount you're going to fill. You also look at your anticipated backfill, so your turnover rate. And depending on your location, you look at the number of declines you might get, or like in a case of India for us and everybody else in India, the dropout rate. So once you've made an offer, the percentage of people that drop out. So all that becomes a math equation, and now you know how many offers you need to get out to get to a bottom line number of positions you need to fill. And then you look at the number of rec load that a recruiter could carry at any given point, and how fast you can fill those roles, and there's your math. So when the recruiter is kicking off a role, they're going to have an intake conversation with the hiring manager. So it's to get to understand the position. Even if they've filled it before, I still have them do this. So get an understanding of the role, how the relationship is going to be between the employee and the hiring manager. Just really get a deep understanding. And if there's anything changed in the team that the person's going to be working on, and then look at the requirements. Is there anything different from if they filled it in the past that they've learned from that now they want to shift those requirements for a better fit or anything like that? Then they are going to sit down and kind of have a verbal contract on, let's call it an SLA, on how they're going to work together. How many resumes a week, or how long will it be till we start to get into interviewing once we've done some sourcing, et cetera. And so the hiring manager can have an estimate of how long it's going to take roughly to fill the job if all goes well. And then there's a process of weekly check-ins. So I advise them to at least connect on a weekly basis, whether it's a call or an email. The rest of the team does issue metrics once a week. This is all done in spreadsheets. So there is a big collective of spreadsheets that goes out. But at least on a recruiter to hiring manager, they should be connecting one-on-one. So for the recruiters, we measure lots of different things like time to fill, their progress in terms of, offer acceptances and, the sources. We like to see passive candidates or whether they've come in through, referrals, et cetera. But there's a lot of data in Greenhouse, and managers, while they can go in and find this themselves, in terms of progress on even their own recs or the performance of their recruiter, it's not built for hiring managers. So there's a lot of frustration with managers. They don't like to go in there. It's hard to kind of get to those metrics. And also I have leadership who likes to see a higher level, so a broader view of how the recruiting team is doing. And you kind of can't get that view in Greenhouse itself. So I've ended up hiring a few people who are able to build me some metrics that take a very broad view. And they're building it in Looker. They're taking it out of Greenhouse, and in some cases from spreadsheets, because not all the data I can track in Greenhouse. And so it's very expensive, but between spreadsheets and Greenhouse exports going into Looker, I'm creating dashboards that we publish weekly so that at a high level, the organization knows if we're hiring to plan or not and how we're getting there. That's one of the number one goals of HR this year, is just hiring to plan. It's very, very challenging. I'm constantly communicating to the organization that, yes, we're on time, we're going to hit our goals, we're going to hire to plan. And there's so much fluctuation from day to day, week to week in this plan that I have to constantly be explaining. And because perception can change, like, well, why is that one delayed? And, sometimes it's on hold, or sometimes the manager changed the job, and people don't know why something is still open. So there's this constant battle of communicating and making sure that what's out there is accurate information. And so a lot of manual manipulation between finance information, what I have in Greenhouse, and then trying to pull it all together between spreadsheets and Looker to get a view out there that is consistent and accurate about what's really going on. So one of the most frustrating things is, all the other functions have their nice dashboards. Sales has got a dashboard, engineering's got their dashboards, and all the teams, finance has got loads of dashboards and metrics. And for HR, we just don't have one. We don't have a system that kind of ties it all together. It's all manual. And especially when it comes to headcount too, because at any given time, I've got maybe sometimes 150 positions open, and I get asked about a single position and where is this, where is that? And so it's like having to know at any one given point where 150 positions are and what's changed and is it on time and, is it constantly in sync with finance? It's like, there's no way. And people need confidence that I'm doing my job. And so it's frustrating. It's really, really frustrating. So in this post-COVID world where things are still unsettled in terms of remote, hybrid, back in the office, every job market is in high gear right now, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in India, Asia, US, every job market is pretty much on fire and exploding right now. There's a lot of investment money out there, so companies are growing. People are getting multiple offers. Compensation, is increasing, exponentially. It's super competitive. coupled with what I mentioned in terms of where people work is now another dimension. That used to be something that we just took for granted. now, it's in flux. And so my advice to, founders and heads of HR, whether you're a startup, or growing into mid-size, is stay flexible. Educate yourself on, know the audience that you're going after, the target demographic. Really understand what they're looking for. But stay true to yourself and the culture and what you're trying to build. Really understand what it is you're trying to create in your culture, but also understand what your demographic wants. So if having a fully remote workforce is something that's going to be really challenging, if you need to be collaborative, you've got to figure out how to balance that. Also keep a very close eye on the compensation data. It is really moving so rapidly. It's going to impact what you think you're going to be able to invest in next year. I guarantee it's going to be fewer people and higher dollars. So keep that in mind. It's going to create a difference in terms of the people you have on board with the new people you bring on. It's just something to watch for and start to plan for now.